in my opinion, it's kind of counterintuitive to try and score brownie points with a progressive Gen Z audience if you're gonna whitewash the entire cast.
Did I lie? Did I...
So Netflix's live-action adaptation of Winx Club released yesterday. I binge-watched the entire thing in one day, but make no mistake, my knowledge of Winx Club goes back years. Some gays grew up off of Powerpuff Girls, Totally Spies, Teen Titans. My shit was Winx Club. That was my thing. In fact, that's why I, to this day, have always called the people who watch my videos and subscribe to my channel fairies. That's a Winx Club reference. Surprise. So I thought that this specific topic would be great to make a video for because it was slightly a little bit of a more controversial release. But now that I've watched the entire thing, as a person that has watched literally every single season of Winx Club, including the Cosmic season, which was horrible, I do have a few things I'd like to say. So if you'd like to sit down and hear what I have to say, then let's get into it.
Yeah, get into it!
So one of the biggest incidents that was being discussed when people first saw the trailer was the fact that the overall tone of the show is quite different than that of the animated series. And that, having watched the show, I kind of still agree with. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and the word that was being thrown around a lot was dark academia. But we're gonna talk about dark academia in a second. I have the whole list on the table. But one thing a lot of people don't realize is that the main artistic influence in Winx Club is Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau is a French art movement that dates back to 1890-ish. I'm sure you've all heard of Tiffany the jeweler, but Tiffany actually started as lamps, an Art Nouveau lamp manufacturer. Art Nouveau is personally one of my favorite art movements. In fact, this necklace I'm wearing right now is an antique from that time period. But Art Nouveau is oftentimes discussed as the fairy art style because it will have natural motifs, curving lines, and the subject matter will always be beautiful young women who are pretty much nearly nude. If you look at various elements of the show, for example, the architecture of Althea, as well as just the designs of the characters, you can really see a huge influence of Art Nouveau. A lot of people, not only on YouTube but also on Twitter, were saying it doesn't look like Winx Club. It looks more like Harry Potter. And to my homosexual eyes, I believe the reason for that is because there is not a lot of Art Nouveau referencing in this one. It does change the visual aesthetic of the show, but in my opinion, it also isn't full-on Hogwarts. It is a little more gothic, but it's not full-on Hogwarts.
Yes.
It reminds me of a hybrid of that old Nickelodeon show that I used to love, House of Anubis. That was my favorite. So it reminds me of House of Anubis mixed with another series called Artemis Fowl. I know a lot of people might know what that is because Disney, that was a disaster. It's kind of like sci-fi elves pretty much. But that's kind of what the Netflix version reminded me of, which I honestly don't mind because I feel like the aesthetic and the tone and just the design of certain things worked really, really well for what they were trying to achieve. A little bit more of like a mature fantasy aesthetic. Like you can see certain elements of the show, like the doors in the courtyard. You know, it looks almost kind of Sylvan, very like Lord of the Rings, almost elvish. They also did play around with a few of the original show's concepts and, in my opinion, kind of expanded on them a little bit more. One of the things that stood out was how they would constantly call what in the original was called the magical universe. They would simply call it the other realm. This is very interesting because throughout the show you can see references to Celtic and Gaelic mythology kind of sprinkled about. And when you're looking at not only Celtic and Gaelic means Irish if you don't know. Even though these cultures are separate, their mythologies do share a common element. They share the other world. It's basically a mythological realm or plane that isn't necessarily a spirit world or an afterlife because the living can enter and go, at least in theory. A famous example of that is Tirnanoke. But on that note of the European, Gaelic, Celtic mythology, that kind of segues into my next topic, which is the dark academia, the label that was used to describe the overall tone or aesthetic of this show. Dark academia is a very great aesthetic. I don't know if you can tell by my backdrop, but I fancy a little bit too. But it is one that is a little bit controversial. And the reason behind that, well, there's multiple reasons. Some people say it could potentially be elitist, but the one I'm going to be going into depth with a little bit today is people say that it is the aesthetic of privilege. And I kind of see that logic, or I kind of see where that statement is coming from, because dark academia is not the aesthetic of newer colleges. It's not the aesthetic of like USC and UC Berkeley, you know, these amazing modern colleges. It's more so the aesthetic of like these old English colleges like Oxford or Harvard, you know, those kind of places. It's not academia, it's dark academia because it's supposed to be old, gothic, musty, kind of creepy at times. But why some people view dark academia, or at least this interpretation of it, as something problematic is because these colleges even today are predominantly attended by WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It's basically English people, rich English people. And I'm not saying that that is the only only and only correct way of interpreting this aesthetic. You can interpret it any way you want, but a lot of people, they seem to view it as the aesthetic of privilege, the aesthetic of having enough money to attend an extremely expensive English university and coming from an extremely privileged family to have the capabilities of just being accepted to one in the first place. And I want to say again that what makes this problematic is not the aesthetic itself, but merely this interpretation of it. Because it is not completely illogical to say that dark academia is an aesthetic that comes from film and certain media depicting very wealthy white people, English people. A very famous and prominent example of dark academia is Harry Potter, and Harry Potter takes place in Scotland. Netflix has definitely done dark academia correctly before, however, the question here isn't as much that, it's more so whether or not that aesthetic was appropriately used or applied in this situation. Because with the mythology and the things scattered around the show, like I mentioned before, there's a huge Celtic, Gaelic, and English mythology. However, if you actually look at Fate, the English influence is overwhelming in almost everything.
How very American of you. Shall we?
What the fuck is going on?
More than 80% of the cast has a very thick English accent. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think we can all agree the English influence is very, very heavy in this one.
Your Majesty?
We will meet again.
And the reason why I keep bringing that up is because another huge scandal with this one was the whitewashing. I tweeted about this and all of the girlies were agreeing with me. They made Musa white, they made Flora white, and they made Techna invisible. But I don't necessarily think they were like, oh, we're doing dark academia, time to like make everyone white. I don't think the casting director at Netflix HQ like said that. But what I do think what happened involves the transfer between animation to live action. And the reason for that, I think I did mention this on this channel before, but I did do job shadowing at Disney Junior Studios in an animation department. So I don't want to say I know the tea, I know where they keep Walt Disney's head.
You what?
I do know the methodology, and I do kind of know a little bit how this industry works, and especially how they make money. In animation, specifically children's animation, one of the biggest sources of revenue is toys and merchandising. Sure, if it's an animated movie, you have the box office. If it's a TV show, you have commercial revenue and stuff like that. But an overwhelming majority of an animated work's profit will come from merchandising. 99.9% of the time. But a lot of kids shows, even during their early creative phases, will be considering merchandising way down the line. For example, Olaf from Frozen, he's the merchandising character. Allegedly, my opinion. Now, the original Winx Club was from 2004, and it was originally made as an Italian cartoon. It was made by an Italian production company. And one thing a lot of people on Twitter were saying, and I kind of agree with this as well, is it's kind of sad that a 2004 European cartoon has a more diverse cast of main characters than a 2020 American-made live-action film or series. And I do agree with that, because the original Winx Club is clearly a show where there's a lot of potential to make dolls. In fact, in my opinion, they give the girls a new form every season so they can make a new doll every season. From a marketing standpoint, it is very important that the show or the merchandising offers a broad range of toys, a diverse range of toys, so parents do not feel reluctant at all to buy their child the toy they want from the show they like. It's also very important that children feel represented in their toys, as this can actually have a huge positive impact on their self-esteem and self-image. And it's kind of a win-win situation because the company is financially incentivized to act in a way that is beneficial to the general public, in my opinion. But I went on that whole spiel to basically tell you that I think that incentive, which created the original cast of Winx Club, it just wasn't there with the live action because they were not financially incentivized to do what's politically correct, which is disappointing. I'm not praising animation companies for doing the bare minimum, but I'm also certainly not praising Netflix when a company isn't financially incentivized to have a diverse cast of characters. They don't. And it really does make people question the motives behind their diversity and inclusivity. As I said, it's extremely disappointing when the financial incentivizing that toys may cause isn't there, and then consequentially, the diversity isn't there as well. And the entire cast is whitewashed. It's almost as if they don't care. And on that note, I segue into my next bullet point, which is that despite the show whitewashing and doing all this other stuff that people strongly disagree with, the fact that they are definitely trying to appeal to a progressive Gen Z audience. And that's not a problem to me because I am a progressive Gen Z, so basically my show. For example, the words mansplaining and sexist were used in the first 10 minutes of the first episode. And there are also moments scattered throughout the show that really do make you feel like, okay, they're, definitely trying to speak to a certain audience per se.
I don't have the time or energy to break down all the problematic gender issues in that statement.
Give in.
Do we need to have a talk about consent?
Better that than some weird loner.
Wow, you just called your daughter a weird loner.
Take a parenting class.
You know, and that's definitely not a bad thing, but in my opinion, it's kind of counterintuitive to try and score brownie points with a progressive Gen Z audience if you're gonna whitewash the entire cast.
Did I lie? Did I lie?
Because what's the point of doing all that and inserting these moments that, in my opinion, some of them feel a little bit forced and out of place, trying to, like I said, score brownie points with a progressive, younger Gen Z audience. If they wanted to do that, they could have just had a racially accurate cast. But going off of that note, that the show does kind of contrast with the source material in ways, or conflict with the source material, I was actually surprised upon finishing the show that they actually didn't just straight up scrap a lot of the things from the original. I was originally kind of disappointed the fact that they didn't keep the tricks and all this other iconic stuff from the original Winx Club, but upon finishing the last episode, I think there's a high probability in the future we may see a few things from the original show reappearing. There are a lot of things in this that are kind of related to the original Winx series, or debatably the same thing just with a different name. So a central point in the lore of the animated series is the ancestresses, or the 3 ancestral witches. Now, this archetype of the 3 witches is very popular in a lot of pop culture media. For example, Netflix's other show, Sabrina, had the 3 weird sisters. And then there's Hocus Pocus. A lot of people think it came from Shakespeare's The Wayward Sisters, I think they were called. The 3 ancestral witches, who are the ancestors of the tricks. So Icy is the descendant of Belladonna. Darcy is the descendant of Lilia, I think that's what she is. And then Stormy is the descendant of Thermia. Now, when the magical universe was created, there was an entity known as the Great Dragon, who is basically the creation deity. Its warmth kind of breathed life into the universe or whatever. So the Great Dragon faded away a long time ago, but it left behind a spark of its power, kind of like the afterglow of creation, kind of like a campfire, an ember that flies off. That's kind of like the things that the Great Dragon left behind, those little embers, and those are called the dragon flames. So those 3 ancestral witches wanted the dragon flame for its immense magical power. They needed it to summon something known as the Army of Decay, which is an army of these super powerful, super fast, almost kind of like demons. But in order to conjure this army, they needed the dragon flame. So the 3 ancestral witches started this huge war, and they attacked a planet known as Sparks, which was one of the planets that had a piece of the dragon fire. But during this war, the princess Daphne took her baby sister, Bloom. So Bloom is the last surviving princess of the planet Sparks in the original. I'm not saying she is in the new one. And Daphne sacrificed herself in order to put the dragon flame safely inside of Bloom and ship her off to the earth. And that's where Bloom's parents adopted her, yada yada yada, but that's why Bloom got the dragon fire. That's why she's so powerful. That's the basic lore of the original Winx Club, but what I'm trying to say is the dragon fire is one of the most important objects in the entire lore, in the entire show. So when I was watching this one, I was just thinking, when are they going to bring up the dragon flame? When are they going to talk about dragon flame? So I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting, like, when are they going to bring it up? And then I got to the last episode and I was thinking, okay, they're not going to bring it up, so dragon fire probably isn't in this series. But I am literally not kidding. The last 5 minutes of the last episode open up the possibilities for everything from the original show to kind of come back. In the last 5 minutes, they confirm the existence of the dragon flame, and they confirm that Bloom had it.
The legend is about the magic used against them. It created them. It's powerful. The dragon flame.
They confirm that witches exist in the magical universe. They call them blood witches in the show. And up until that point, they hadn't really mentioned witches at all. There was just fairies and non-fairies. So they confirm the existence of witches, and then they confirm that Bloom was actually abducted as a baby by witches, and she was saved just in time before the witches could sacrifice her and take her power, aka the dragon flame. So by them confirming in those last few minutes that witches and the dragon flame both exist, I was able to kind of tie everything together, and in my opinion, season 1 was just the prologue to a story that will be similar to the animated show. I think there's a good chance in the next season we might see 3 witch antagonists, something similar to the tricks, because it's said within the last few minutes as well that the burned ones are the remnants of an army of a war that was fought thousands of years ago using ancient magic. That's literally the exact same concept as the Army of Decay from the original, which is something the tricks were trying to finish in order to avenge their ancestresses. And it's confirmed by Rosalind that the dragon fire was also used to make the burned ones. That was kind of obvious, and because they're kind of setting up this plot, this new plot structure where a war is coming, there were witches, they used the power of the dragon flame to make this army, I think we could be seeing a group of villains like the tricks in season 2. It's kind of what makes sense. If you look at the way season 1 ended, where basically Beatrix and Rosalind are kind of almost like on Bloom's side. They're kind of crazy, but they're kind of on Bloom's Bloom's side, there's this kind of vacant space for a villain now, and I do kind of believe that those villains could potentially be witches. However, Rosalind could also be the just overarching villain of the entire show, the main antagonist, but that all depends on whether or not they do this thing.
Yes.
Have magic work the same way as it did in the cartoon. In the animated series, they play around with this concept that magic has different polarities. There's like good magic and bad magic, light and dark, kind of like the Force in Star Wars. And the Dragonfire is something that has polarities as well. Its dark side is basically a super weapon, but its light side has the ability to heal any injury. And we do kind of see that happen towards the end when Bloom has her, you know, her little Old Navy transformation. We do see Bloom basically healing and removing the curse that the dark side of the Dragonflame put on them, and we can say that she's using the light side of the Dragonflame to do so. Towards the end though, when Sam got scratched by one of the burned ones, I really thought Bloom was gonna pull up and basically just, you know, magically heal him, because something similar happened in the original show. She basically heals someone who they all thought was gonna die, but it wasn't through Sam, who in my opinion is better than Sky.
That's my opinion!
They showed this positive side when she basically removed the curse that was on the burned ones. We could either be seeing characters like the Tricks or witch characters, or the villain could just be Rosalind and she's trying to kind of groom Bloom into becoming this living super weapon or something like that. Based on the last episode, I really do feel like this was just the beginning of something. I really do feel like they're going to expand upon it, and I feel like certain very well-loved elements are going to be introduced slowly in the future. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to bring up. I finally did a Winx Club video. It feels weird. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed my new microphone. I don't know if you could tell I got one.
Finally!
My old one was absolute crap, so thank God I have a new one. But if you did enjoy, please subscribe, maybe even leave a little comment. It really does help with the algorithm, and the YouTube algorithm hates me. I think it might be because I helped take down one of their highest earning influencers, but let's not talk about that. I don't feel like getting another takedown notice. But thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, please feel free to subscribe, and I do post occasionally, so hopefully I will see you then. Bye.
Take a parenting class.
Here's my makeup without glasses, by the way. I used the new Alter Ego Canyons palette. I was feeling like a little sexy librarian earlier, so I decided to do a little warm tone nude with a red lip.
Okay.